And so I left 2 West 42 with this dream still. Here I'm now using crayons. About a year after that incident, it was time to apply to college. And because I wanted to be an astronaut, I, of course, wanted to learn how to fly in the military. All of the astronauts were military pilots. It was the only way into the NASA Astronaut Corps. But when I went to have my flight physical to be admitted to the United States Air Force Academy to become a military pilot, I was immediately disqualified because of the medical event that had occurred a year before. So I was not allowed to enter the military. I was not allowed to go to the Air Force Academy, which is pictured here. And so it was a devastating setback because the only way to become an astronaut in the United States was to be a military pilot. So I was devastated. I went home from that flight physical and had a good cry with my parents. But within a day or two, I was back on the path to this dream because it was an audacious dream and a dream that I was passionate about. And I had these 2 West 42 skills about living life simply in keeping your eye on these big goals. This is a pencil drawing, probably at the age of 10 or 11. You can see I'm still doing spacewalks during the launch. But I do want to draw your attention to my face inside that space mask. You can see this giant, exaggerated smile. And that's because when you pick these big goals, you want to pick them so that they make you really happy. So saving the Earth, for example, will make me really happy and you also. And so we're looking for these things that just thrill us. Well, I couldn't go to the Air Force Academy, but I had to pivot and come up with a new direction, hoping that someday NASA would take regular pilots and not military pilots. So I found a pretty good school not too far from my house called Stanford University. One got some engineering degrees, as you heard. But they also had a flying club, and Palo Alto Airport is not too far from the university. So I got my pilot's license also. Again, hoping that someday NASA would take non-military pilots. I then went to work at IBM as an engineer, and during that period, that first couple of years, NASA did change the rule and started taking civilian pilots, and so I applied to be an astronaut. Within a couple weeks of that application that I sent in, I got a very plain, very small envelope from the United States government with letter inside that said, "We don't want you." And they didn't say why, but they just said I was not going to be selected as an astronaut. And so once again, you've got this big setback on your way to this big audacious goal. And I had to practice what I was preaching, practice what the explorers say, that you just come to these roadblocks and these disappointments, come up with innovative solutions and keep moving forward. And so that's what I did. Tried to do different schooling, different skill development. And I had to get good at it because they refused me over a 10-year period 4 times. So I had the Air Force rejection and now NASA, 4 NASA rejections.
Hello.
And this is kind of that third attribute of the explorer's mindset, and that's that you have this audacious goal, you fight your way, you have this grit of perseverance to continue, and sometimes it takes a long time. And that long-term pursuit of something you're joyful for.
4 rejection letters.
And so I tried really hard to be different along the way. I put together plans. This is a schedule of different things I was going to do. It's embarrassing to show software at the time, so it's hand-drawn, but you can see this is around 1991, 92. And of course, I was doing everything I can think of, trying to be creative, reading books to get data, learning more skills like flying airplanes. I actually wrote to the astronauts, hoping that they could give me some advice, and they did. This letter in particular is to another Stanford grad, Dr. Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. And finally, I really had to take a big step, and that's leave a job that I loved at IBM to actually go to work at Mission Control at NASA in Houston. So I actually joined NASA as an engineer. That's a picture of me as a flight controller. To again change the equation, to put myself in front of the decision makers, to learn about the NASA culture. That strategy worked perfectly. 74 days after I got to NASA as an engineer, I was invited to interview as an astronaut. I was extremely excited about that. I got that news on October 18th of one year. On October 19th, I went to work. I was so happy. I made the interview round, which means I had gone from thousands of applicants down to the final 100. But on October 19th, my boss called me into his office, and he said, "Yeah, I don't want you to take the interview." So I was shocked and really upset. And he explained to me that he felt it wasn't fair to him or to the group because I hadn't been there long. Remember, I'd only been there a couple months. So I was really upset, really tormented. I went home from work that day on October 20th. I flew to California to get married. On the 21st, Peggy and I had our rehearsal dinner. On the 22nd, we were married. And on October 23rd, I flew to Hawaii for our honeymoon, still not having told NASA what my decision was. In any case, I did call them on October 23rd. Dwayne Ross was the head of the astronaut selection office, answered the phone, and I said, Dwayne, I'm going to turn down the interview opportunity. The phone was quiet for a really long time, it seemed like, and then kind of in an adult voice, he said, no one has ever done that to us before. But again, when you've got this mindset with these long-term goals, sometimes you have to pay big prices to keep the dream alive. And so I did turn down that interview opportunity. My wife and I flew back from our honeymoon, and I worked for that same manager for another couple of years. Peggy called him Mr. Mean Guy and other names, and other kind of colorful names. In any case, 2 years later, I was selected as an astronaut, got to fly in space. And so along the way, big dreams, this grit and perseverance to keep going and coming up with creative solutions. Sometimes it took big sacrifices. Now, flying in space, as I said before, was amazing. Here I am launching on my first flight aboard the space shuttle from Florida. I can tell you that before the launch, in the cockpit of the shuttle, we're there for about 2 hours. We're really not scared at that point, which is kind of remarkable. And that's because we had been trained so thoroughly and had practiced over and over and over again that we kind of felt like we had been there before and that we were really well prepared. And of course, that's the key to success in almost anything we do, is to practice, practice, practice. I will say that we were anxious because we, of course, didn't want to make a mistake along the way. Now, at liftoff, it's like a giant kick in the rear end. You are kind of catapulted off the launch pad. We go from the launch pad to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. It is a violent ride at the beginning. There's all kinds of shaking. It's almost hard to read the computer screens in front of you. It's also accelerating so fast that you feel really heavy. I weighed about 600 pounds going into space. It's kind of hard to move my arm and to pick my head up and things like that. But once you get into space, it's incredible because the engines stop and you are immediately in this magical place where there's no gravity. Now, during that 8.5 minute ride to space, we were extremely happy because we had worked so hard to get there. For me, it had been a 33-year journey, quite a bit of joy. But you can imagine for the families who were just 3 miles away from the launch pad, watching this thing go up into space was very stressful for them. And of course, they would have lived with the consequences had anything happened. So for that reason, I consider my wife and family to be the heroes of the space program. They really carry the burdens of the risk there. Now, zero gravity is amazing. You can imagine in the room you're in, if you could turn the gravity off in there with like the flip of a switch, what would happen? I mean, look at all the things around your room that would start floating up. You would start floating up. The computer would start floating up. Eventually, you'd kind of run into the ceiling and push off and float down to the floor. It is just this magical feeling. You can imagine, for example, if you went into the kitchen and had turned gravity off there, the refrigerator, you could just play catch with the refrigerator with one of your family members. It's this bizarre life. And so here you see me floating in the space station. I'm not wearing shoes because we don't walk in space. You'll also notice that I have 2 watches on. When we're going 17,500 miles an hour, we go around the world in 90 minutes. That means in one 24-hour day, we go around the world 16 times. It gets really confusing because the sun goes up or down every 45 minutes. We see 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets per day. So it's really confusing. So I have 2 watches on. The one watch I kept on home time, where Peggy and the kids were, the black watch, and the silver and gold watch was set on mission elapsed time. And so it's really, really this magical, strange life. A couple other things happen when you're in zero gravity. Your stomach's not happy. Most astronauts get sick for a day or 2 because your body was developed here on one gravity, so everything's in the right place. And all of a sudden, you're up there, no gravity, everything's floating around, all the organs in your body, all the fluid in your ears. So getting sick is quite common in space. Usually we get better, as I said, over a day or 2. But I threw up about 100 times in my 4 flights. It's a kind of a crummy feeling, of course. It's a really weird feeling to know that, next week when I go to work on Thursday, I'm going to throw up 10 times. So it's really a bizarre job in that respect. Another funny thing happens is that we grow in space about 1.5 to 2 inches, and that's because our spine gets longer. We don't have gravity pushing it together. We do measure every astronaut in space so that we have scientific data on how much they grew so that we can fit their spacesuits on their next flight. When we measure people in space, instead of just measuring them with their feet on the floor, measuring where their head is, as you see on the left here, we actually have them float over. We put their head on the floor and measure where their feet are, just to be fun. This is Steve Hawley getting measured. The other thing that's cool in space is you can sleep anywhere on the center of the wall, wherever you want to sleep, because there's Velcro there. So you're going to sleep on the wall. As you fall asleep, you got to think about your arms. I always put them inside the sleeping bag because if you didn't, they would kind of just float around all night as you fall asleep. And it's bizarre to see your hands kind of crossing in front of your face in the middle of the night. We also have to put a seatbelt on our head because otherwise it'll float around all night too. And finally, spacewalking is kind of my thing to do. And unfortunately, there's nowhere on Earth's surface that we actually can turn gravity off. We can kind of pretend in an airplane that flies for parabolas for short amounts of time, or we can put pretend spaceships in a big pool and then put pretend spacesuits on and practice our spacewalks in the pool. And so that's how I was prepared for my spacewalks. In fact, that's the Hubble Space Telescope pretend one on the right there. And we do that so we can do things like this. Here I am with the Hubble Space Telescope flying over Australia. That suit weighs 300 pounds on Earth. It's different than the orange one that we wore for liftoff. This is, again, that one that keeps us safe because there's no oxygen out there. Now, my second subject for today is about life and how to live life. And again, this all comes from this dramatic 2S42 event as a 15-year-old. It really gave me a different way to live life, to achieve the most, and to be the most happy. And one of the things about these lives we live is they're incredibly complicated. There's so much going on out there. And so these pictures kind of depict my life the first day I became an astronaut. There was so much to learn. It was overwhelming. The space shuttle, the T-38 aircraft, the Hubble Space Telescope, 3 different spacesuits, the white one, the orange one, the blue one, and all kinds of different kinds of tools to learn how to work. And of course, all the instructors want you to know their system the best. And so I would go home at night with all this information to learn, and it was just overwhelming. It was absolutely crushing. And of course, when I got home, I had family responsibilities, right? I was a spouse to Peggy, my parents. I was a son to a parents. I have a sister, and of course, I wanted to be a good community member too. And so this is just more requirements laying on top of me. So how does someone succeed with all of this pressure from all these different angles? Oh, and by the way, just a couple months after I became an astronaut, we had a baby for the first time. So life got extremely, extremely busy. And for those of you who are parents, and when you become a parent, this is a little hint, when you have a child, kind of everything gets pushed out of the way and they become top. So in an extremely busy life in the 21st century, how do we succeed? And this is, again, a lesson from 2S42. It's really a simple slogan, and my advice to you is simplify your life. I learned this in 2S42. It's the only way to have more ability to breathe, and have more time to yourself, etc. And there's really 3 simple steps. The first is you have got to know what your priorities are. You've got to have a priority list. It's not something that you write down necessarily. I don't have mine written down. But you've got to know what your priorities are, and you've got to live to them. So when something new comes into your life, do you put it on the list? And if you do, where do you put it on the list? Or do you leave it off the list? We have so many bright, shiny objects coming into our lives. So you have to have that priority list. By the way, that priority list does change depending on the situation here. The priority list you have now is probably different than the one you had 24 hours ago on a Sunday evening. So you have to have this priority list. And I had to have when I was flying the T-38. There are 127 pieces of information available in this cockpit of this supersonic jet that flies over 600 miles an hour. And so if I didn't have a priority list, I wouldn't know how to fly this. Well, we, of course, are trained to have our priorities. And there are 3 pieces of information in this massive number of things which are most important. And they're highlighted by the red block. It's altitude, attitude, and airspeed. Attitude is kind of the position of the airplane. So when you're flying the T-38, you're trained to look at those 3 dials a lot. In fact, look at them, look over to the left what's going on, and come back to the red ones. Look over to the right, come back to the red ones. Look down and to the left, come back to the red ones. Look out the window, come back to the red ones. So you have to have these priority lists. Now, as I said before, things changed. I was hit by lightning twice by flying the T-38. Then the priorities changed. The 3 red ones are still number 1. But then you start paying attention to the things on the right side of this picture, which are the engine instruments. You're just hoping that the 2 engines aren't damaged and they're still running. So that's step 1 to simplifying your life. Have a priority list. The second is to get rid of the noise in your life. This is a display at a local library that I was working at just before COVID, and that month's theme was simplifying your life. In fact, you see things like unclutter your mind and the minimalist home. And so I really learned at that experience as a 15-year-old that part of getting rid of the noise is owning less things. So I'm kind of a minimalist. I actually don't have many things. And so that's one way to get rid of the noise in your life, is to have fewer things. Now, another way to get rid of the noise in your life is to look at your priority list. Are there things on there that have just been there forever that you can remove? So think about that. Maybe even there might be a relationship or 2 on there that just is taking time and still isn't valuable to you. And so you want to minimize the noise in your life. The third step that I tell people to take is to quit wasting time. Quit wasting time. And it's a constant struggle. I don't mean to tell you today that you can just resolve this and it'll be gone forever. It's really a constant struggle for me also. There's always so many interesting things going on in life that there's always this chance to waste time. But even if you can just save 10 minutes a day, it's a massive growth. I think that's about 3 full days of time you have at the end of the year. So we're looking for ways to save time. Potentially have shorter meetings or fewer meetings. Again, maybe take things that are on your list and take them off your list. Fight all those shiny objects on the internet. Only a few cat videos per day, not more than that. And so again, you're looking for things that could save you time. And so that's how I live a really balanced life. It's knowing what the priorities are, getting rid of the noise in your life, not just audible noise, but also stuff or relationships or action items, and then to quit wasting time. And so now we'll go to my third subject, and that's it is gorgeous when you see it from space. It really is one of the most awe-inspiring things you can ever see. It really changes the way that someone thinks about both the Earth as a living body and also your thoughts about world peace. In terms of Earth as a beautiful environmental place, it really is an island in the Black Ocean. I encourage you from this day forward to think of Earth as this beautiful island in this vast black ocean. And of course, if you live on an island, you need to take care of it because it's a limited resources. And also this peace quotient. When we look at the Earth, this is the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America. You don't see any borders. So when astronauts see the Earth from space, it really is hard to imagine conflict on Earth because it really is one global community. And if you want to know more about that, you can look up on the internet more about this mindset that we get from seeing the Earth from space. And so let's have Earth as an island. For me, it really is this stage that we're gifted to perform on, this beautiful place. And we really are lucky to be here rather than having it as a right that's given to us. And for that reason, to respect the Earth as a place that we're here to perform is so important to me, and because of my obligation to future generations. And it's very clear that we are not respecting the Earth right now and need to do something. The sirens are really sounding. And so let me do a couple more thoughts before I conclude on this. The first is we also have to deal with the fact that the population is growing at a huge rate. This is just a random website, ecology.com, and it shows that the population is growing around 2 people per second, which is kind of alarming, especially if we live on an island. Now, I will tell you, it's gorgeous. We see things like volcanoes. This is in the Aleutian Islands. It's the Mount Cleveland, absolutely beautiful, erupting there. We also see beautiful glaciers. This is Patagonia in South America, beautiful contrast with colors. This is the Uppsala Glacier flowing from left to right. We see all kinds of patterns. On the upper left is the Bahamas. On the lower right is a dry salt lake in Australia. This is my favorite picture from space from the last couple of years. This is from the space station crew. This is Rock Chaktal Lake in Tibet, and it's just starting to freeze over. So you've got these beautiful blue contrasts with the brown rocks, and then you've got ice actually starting to grow on the surface of the water. This is the Middle East. At the top is the Mediterranean, where there's some clouds. And then you see that green line going through the desert. That's the Nile River with the Red Sea down to the lower right. Again, beautiful, beautiful sights. However, from space, my perspective was that there is a lot of human influence that's really obvious. Some of it's kind of beautiful in nature. Ironically, on the left, we have some salt ponds in Spain. And some are other odd ones. This round circle is the Nardo racetrack in northern Italy. Now, this is Earthlings trying to gather energy. This is West Texas, so these are oil drilling rigs. So this is where we're going into the ground and taking out this black goopy stuff to make energy. We could also do it in easier ways. This is energy being gathered in Southern California. This is the Topaz Solar Farm. At one time, it was the largest one in the world. We can also, of course, get clean energy from wind, offshore wind, which Tia's husband, Adam, is working on. So this is the picture of the North Sea. These are windmills, as you see the little white dots. Let me close, though, with about 6 pairs of pictures of a place on Earth long ago, maybe 30 years or so, along with a present picture. So this is the Persian Gulf. This is called the Palm Islands. Very clearly on the left, there were signs of people even 30 or 40 years ago there, but now we've got these artificial islands that they've built out there to deal with the growing population, but also to provide waterfront property. This is a mining operation in the Andes Mountains. On the left, 1975, you can see the pristine mountains, and on the right, you can see it very clearly is now scarred by all the mining operations. Who knows what kind of toxic chemicals are in that water retention pond at the bottom. Deforestation, of course, is just a huge issue. Brazil has been in the news the last 3 years. Big problems still going on. This is Bolivia on the left, 1975, and then about 28 years later. On the left, you can see only treetops when you look down, and on the right, since the trees have been removed, you look right at the dirt. So this is deforestation. The use of water is very interesting too. This is Saudi Arabia on the left, again back in the 1980s, pristine desert. On the right now we have these green dots, and that's to grow crops in the middle of the desert. They've drilled for water, thousands of feet down, come up, and the sprinkler goes in a circle. So again, the use of water. This is if you use too much water and it's not managed. This is the famous ROC in Russia, the subject of a National Geographic special. On the left, you can see that it was starting to recede from its ancient shorelines even 20, 30 years ago, and now it's basically gone. And if you're to walk in this area, you'll find ships in the desert. The growth of people going to metropolises, to cities, this urbanization is a worldwide phenomenon. An alarming number of people now are leaving the countryside to go to the major cities. This happens in our country too. This happens to be the Philippines on the left. You can see the city in the Philippines was very large at the time, Manila. And on the right, of course, it's even more spreading now. There, of course, is Earth Truth data. I didn't take these pictures, but this is the Wrangell Glacier around 1900 at the top, and then the year 2000 at the bottom. And so the exact same place, 100 years apart. Pretty alarming. Why do we want to take care of it? Well, for future generations, right? We are here just as guests. We have no right to turn over the Earth in worse shape or in bad shape to our future generations. This is my kids with me at a training exercise about 15, 20 years ago. And so I feel obligated to do as much as I can to help save the Earth for that generation. There's another population that's silent, but also deserves our respect, and that's the wild animals of the world. This is the sign that I came across in the Amsterdam airport about 4 years ago. Really great message from the World Wildlife Foundation. And so this is, of course, a group that does not have any voice. And so with that, I'll just close with this picture called Earthrise from 1968. It was really, this picture helped kind of awaken the environmental movement back in the late 60s, taking on Apollo 8. And so what I'd like you to think about in terms of the view of Earth is, I have in my head, I have a little blue marble. And if we were to go to the largest stadium, for example, that is near you, and we were to cover the field with a beautiful piece of black velvet, and then we came into the stadium, rather than running around on the field with the black velvet, we kind of just stood aside. And I took this marble and I threw it, and it kind of flew through the air, bounced, and it kind of rolled to a stop in just a random place. what you would see, of course, is this ocean. And I'm pointing to it because to inspire you to please remember that we live on an island. And so what we've talked about is taking care of that island. And in order to get in that position to do that, to be this steward for the environment, you've got to find your balance by getting rid of the noise in your life, having a priority list to put wasting time. And also then engage with this wise, compassionate action to take care of the earth. And so with that, Jay, I'm going to put my NASA flight jacket on because I like having this on for the Q&A.
Let me see his
Thank you
jacket.
so much, Steve. Yes, great. I'm going to ask you to stop sharing screens so we can see you more fully. Well, what an inspiring tour of your life and of the experience of actually being in space. Thank you for taking us to a place that most of us will never go except through your careful guide and journey. So we appreciate that. We have several questions, and I will ask them in categories. One is that we have this theme of the audacious goals and the theme of exploration. And then we have the inspiration to tend to the planet. Could you speak to the balance between what could be a colonial mindset or a colonization mindset in exploration and stewardship and tending and caring as one explores?
Sure, you bet. Well, the whole purpose of America's space program, and I believe most of the space programs in the world, is to make life on Earth better. So most people don't realize that the single reason NASA exists is to make life on Earth better. And we do that through gathering information from going into space. So we gather information about how to solve problems that are here on Earth. And when we go to other places like the moon and Mars, the whole point there is to help us with life on Earth. For example, Mars was much like Earth billions of years ago, and something happened. What happened there? So our thought is we will go there not to colonize it, not to take all the minerals and resources from there, but to find out what happened there so that we can prevent, hopefully, something like that happening here on Earth. And so most of the other things that we think about the space program has without people involved are the satellites that are studying our Earth's surface and our Earth weather patterns, etc. That's all to make our lives here on Earth better. And so I just cringe at the thought that there's going to be this land grab in outer space. And I think most of the space programs in the world really have the ideal of making our lives here on Earth better.
Thank you. Could you say a little bit more about some details, such as there a garden in the space station?
Oh, that's really a super question. So in order to explore, well, let's back up. So as we circle the Earth on the space station, it's not going to the moon or to Mars. It's going around the Earth where there's no gravity. And by taking advantage of the fact that there's no gravity, we can perform experiments there that can't be done on Earth where we have gravity. And we gain really deep scientific information about how things operate naturally in this zero gravity environment. So, for example, how do seeds germinate, how do plants grow, etc. We know a lot from, of course, all of our studies here on Earth, but if we can learn more in space, potentially we can make crop production, for example, higher on Earth. So we don't grow our food in space yet. We do grow plants on the space station, but again, that's just a study to understand the biology of plant life and how it can affect how we operate here on Earth. Now, when we do go on these long trips to Mars, for example, we will have to grow our own food, so it'll have to be in bigger numbers. The trip from the Earth to the moon is about 3 days each way, so we can take all of our food both ways. That's what we did for Apollo. But to get to the moon, which is much, much, much farther from Earth,
Mars.
it's about a 9-month trip each way. We'll have to learn how to grow food along the way.
In the spirit of these scientific efforts, could you say a little bit more about some of the satellite data and how one might consider what NASA is collecting to be a dashboard? You showed us the impressive image of the planes, dials, and dashboard. And in the theme that you emphasized of not having clutter, how can we work with our representatives in government to have a voice on what data we feel in our commitment to saving the planet is going to be useful data and be in collaboration with all the data that we know science and technology could be collecting. And if you have any viewpoint or perspective on what is the most valuable data.
Yeah, so what I'd like to say at this point is we have to speak with our voices. We have to speak with the way we live our life. We have to speak with the way we spend our money to help the earth move forward. And so, for example, if you have this passionate interest about having really smart people who are working on the satellites of the future and the science of the future, determine what is the best data to get down to us to help us move forward, you would support those organizations and encourage our elected representatives to find some balance in the way that we spend our life. Right now, I personally believe we don't spend enough on research and development and scientific advancement. And so I think as individual citizens, the first thing we have to do is, with our vote, is speak. We also, I think, have to support the organizations that are collaboratively moving forward in areas like that, the well-known environmental organizations and all the startups that are helping us get better data in for the future. And then, in our personal lives, there's lots of things we can do, too, in terms of the way we buy things. For example, Peggy and I were at Whole Foods yesterday, and we actually found deodorant that doesn't come in a plastic container. I didn't even know something like that existed. And we also found a dental floss that isn't in a plastic container. So again, with our personal choices, we have to also help move things forward. My understanding is one of the best things that someone can do in terms of lifestyle is to not eat as much red meat. We've tried to eliminate it from our lives. So that's one of the biggest steps that we can take. So I hope that kind of gives a broad answer to that question.
Yes, thank you. Now I'm going to bridge the insights you referenced in, was it 242W?
Yeah.
That the insights you gained by facing the fragileness of the human body are in the realm that a lot of people who are in this summit are considering, which is being self-reflective, being self-aware, being capable of thinking about one's life beyond just your individual narrative. And so we have a question here offered by Jim Thompson, and he says, Steve, wonderful presentation, loved it. Question, when we are hyper-focused on something, goals, priorities, etc., we can miss opportunities that we don't even notice because of having a, quote, hard focus, end quote. Do you ever intentionally take a, quote, soft focus to be more aware of opportunities that don't currently fit into a priority list? In the same vein, Isa said, quote, napped half the day, nobody punished me.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jim. It's good to hear from you. The main theme here is not to be ultra focused on the things that you're considering how you're going to spend your life. It's to first establish a lifestyle that allows you to have more time, more space, more mindset, ability to keep your growth mindset out there for all these things that are to come. We all have a fear of missing out on things, but your best opportunity to catch those things that are important to you and to be able to spend your time on those is to live that mantra of simplifying your life, having a priority list, getting rid of the noise. I can't stress that part of this enough. And then to quit wasting time. And so I do live with the fear of missing out. There's just so many great podcasts out there and information sources and new technology. There's nothing you can do about that except give yourself as much peace and mindset as you can. And so someone asked me a couple weeks ago, do you feel like you live a balanced life? And I immediately said yes, which is, I think rare these days. And so I would really start with that part. And then you'll have this extra time and mindset to be able to find what's interesting to you. It's not a hyper focus.
Thank you. Very clarifying. Referring back again to the fact that you faced mortality, the have a question from Kat who says, how could somebody prepare for unexpected obstacles like reduction in functional capacity due to health issues and aging?
Yeah, well, a couple thoughts there. One is, live as healthy as a lifestyle you can. Control everything that you can. For example, we consider our bodies temples, so we eat very carefully. Try and get as much sleep as we can. We try and exercise regularly. Talking about a priority list, those are near the top. And so you can only do what you can do. And so for me, it's doing the best I can to live a healthy life. Now, knowing that unexpected things can happen, my gosh, we hear the stories all the time from friends and family. Live life to its fullest while you can. Don't hold grudges. Don't waste your time and things like that. Live it to its fullest. One kind of analogy I give sometimes, I'll mention it now, is if life is like a juggling act, you're juggling all these balls. If you have too many of them, you're going to miss some of them. And some of those are crystal. And so the fewer you have, the more likelihood you are to be able to really pay attention to the important ones, like family, health, etc.
And I also hear in that your emphasis to not be afraid as you make choices to tend the temple of your body, to do it with the spirit of your words earlier of joy and enjoyment, and to do things wholeheartedly and fully.
Yeah, it really is for me, mindfulness, living in the moment. What's past is past. The grudges are past. It's just not worth it. It's just so fragile. We hear these stories every day about people whose lives were cut short. I mean, you got to live in the moment. Live for the moment.
Thank you. And that cues us to the next question, which came anonymously. And it's a matter of semantics. And this person asks, how do you reconcile having the audacious goals, which require in part a future focus, with one of the major guideposts of mindfulness, which is to be in the present moment?
Now, that's a great question. Let me say that, we can't get around the fact that some of these audacious goals take many steps along the way. And so I often have young people come to me and say, well, how do you become an astronaut? What should I do? And the first thing I tell them is make sure that every step along the way to the dream of becoming an astronaut, you're doing something that you love. Don't do things that you think will increase your chances of that if you don't love them. So for example, probably the astronauts of the future that work for governments probably will have to know multiple languages. So instead of English, probably Russian or Chinese or Indian, or different Indian languages. And so if you love languages, learn one, and it helps you get along the way. But don't work your way towards being an astronaut and take language lessons if you don't love it. So you've got to be joyful all along the way and be ready to adjust along the way and to feel like, well, this is a learning experience. Wow, I am so excited by trying to find the new path forward. That's the way we think about with this mindset. We are convinced we'll find some way to keep moving forward. Be joyful along the way, though.
Very well stated. Thank you. And then we have two people who have asked basically the same question. Is it common to have a mystical experience when viewing the Earth from space? And where and how do we find that experience while we're still held by gravity?
So it really is this mystical experience that you have in space. For some people, it goes into the religious realm. They see the Earth and think, my gosh, how did the Creator put us here, etc. For others, it might not be as religious, but I still would call it magical or mystical, or spiritual is the right word. And so it really spans this whole spectrum. The folks that walked on the moon, who were the farthest away from the Earth, really were even more affected than those of us who flew around the Earth. So many of the Apollo moonwalkers came back much changed. In terms of life here on Earth, that's a really appropriate question, because when I was done flying, I got back to Earth, I'm thinking, what's going to make me happy now? I reached my dream. I can't ride a rocket anymore. What's going to make me happy now? You find what makes you joyful. And so for me, it's still the outdoors, mountain climbing, camping, backpacking, canoeing, just driving 25 or 30 minutes over to the ocean and walking in the water. So for me, nature still is my sanctuary, my place to go. And in terms of the adrenaline rush, scuba diving is a great one for me because it really is kind of inner space here on Earth. It's not that hard to do, and if you're careful or if you have certain guidelines, you can keep it pretty safe also. But having said all that, I should tell you that 2 to 3 times per year, I do dream about flying in space still, and I'll wake up and I'll say to Peggy, "Hey, I had another spacewalk last night. That was awesome." Or I still visited all 50 states. So it's okay to have that every once in a while, but you've got to find where your joy is.
I can
For me, it's the outdoors.
your eyes and your smile. So we have a question again from 2 people on the same theme, and this is I'll read them. Some people feel that the recent civilian trips to space and aspirations to send people to Mars are a distraction from the urgent environmental problems on Earth. How do you see this choice? And in the same spirit of that question, wouldn't it make more sense, this is a different person writing, wouldn't it make more sense for the private enterprises now having space races to use their intelligence and resources to heal the planet?
So before I answer that question, I did want to revisit one thing I just said, and that's that for all of the young listeners today, well, actually for anybody in any part of their life, make sure that you're pursuing joyful things that you want to do, not what other people expect you to do. That's so important. I just cringe when I hear stories about people who are in their 30s doing a job that they don't like, and they tell me about a dream they had in their 20s. So make sure you find what makes you happy right now in your life, even if you have to make big changes. Now, to the question that you just asked, Tia, I think that the public perception of what's going on with the private space travelers right now isn't fully cognizant of the fact that that's not the goal of these. Certainly there will be space tourism. There's other things that people do on the Earth, but that's not what these rocket companies are aimed at doing. So, for example, if you listen to Jeff Bezos speak after his first flight into space, which, everyone said, oh, it's a billionaire spending money just to go into space with some of his friends. But if you listen to what his real goal is, it's to make the Earth a better place. His goal is to move all of the polluting manufacturing that's done on the Earth into space. And so I think, we're getting hung up a little bit on what the public narrative is. And it's not about millionaires flying in space. For example, you don't see Elon Musk flying in space, even though he built his rockets. His whole goal is to come up with Plan B, and that is to habitat Mars. I don't think we'll ever do that. I think we'll go there and explore it, but I don't think we'll move millions of people there. But that's his goal. He said that hundreds of times. It's not about flying wealthy people in space. Now, there was another really important point to that question, and that is, shouldn't the effort and the money and the material that we're using, etc., be aimed at making the Earth a better place? That was the first point I made, that these are not designed to just shoot money out into space and burn it up. It's to actually make our lives here on Earth better. It's just not the narrative that the press is carrying right now.
Could you continue to clarify what is going on? Because there is a lot of confusion from the press, but you have other sources of information, and we have many people expressing the fact that mankind has come up with ideas such as burying waste and shipping waste to other countries, and it hasn't always proven to be a sustainable solution, and in many cases has led to unforeseen damage. And how can the ideas that are being put forth be vetted through some of the standards of lessons from the past?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So just to kind of give the big picture, the Space Race 2.0 is on right now. Space Race 1 was, kind of the Russians versus the Americans in the 60s and 70s. So Space Race 2 is happening right now, and it's not just about the SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, which are the three you've kind of heard about lately. There are hundreds of companies that are investing in space right now. I think the last number I saw, there was $28 billion invested in hundreds of space companies in the last 3 months. And if you look at what most of them are doing, it's things to make life on Earth better. And let me give you at least one example that comes to my head right now. So right now, the effects of climate change are very bad on people, and they affect different social groups, of course, differently. There's great inequity in the effects that bad weather has on different social groups. Right now, weather forecasting is still not super helpful. We know sometimes when bad things are going to happen, like yesterday we heard it's going to rain like heck. Last night it rained, 2 or 3 inches. But on a daily basis, we still don't really have really good weather forecasting that says, not that it might be windy tomorrow, but from 2 to 4 o'clock tomorrow it might be windy. That would help businesses make decisions, government make decisions if they had better weather information. So there's a company that's going to launch radars into space, get better radar data to put into the models to make weather forecasting better. And so that's just one example of, I think, many things that are happening that are going to make life on Earth better. And I think we should be reflect on previous things that happened that were kind of misinterpreted at the beginning. I mean, I think even civil aviation, for example, at the beginning, it was just for rich people, and now aviation is, available to a much wider group and has many benefits for our society. The other thing, Tia, sorry to interrupt there before you get the next question, is, a lot of the questions you've asked, the answer should contain the word balance. Okay, it's not 1 or 0. It's balance. So we do want to use, like when we put together our personal budgets, we do put money away for the future. We do put money to take care of our current requirements. And we do spend a little bit of money to have this balance in life. And so a lot of the questions that have been asked, really the answer is not 1 or 0. It's a balance between them.
Tying together the question about whether there was a mystical experience being in space with the question of clarifying what the different space projects are about, let's invite your wisdom and life experience to speak to how the phrase "make life better on Earth" includes "make life better for the Earth."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so through many decades of bad decisions, we have harmed the Earth. With all the political squabbles going on, we will continue to use combustion engines that will continue to hurt our Earth. But I really feel like there's a huge trend towards environmental awareness. We often wonder whether the governments will lead or the businesses will lead. I think in the last few years, some governments in the world have taken great steps. The European Union, for example, has already put in place laws that will change the way we're moving forward. For example, I've forgotten which year it goes into effect, but there won't be sales of internal combustion engine cars in the future, and it's not too far off from the European Union. Other governments are still squabbling over what to do. On the business side, it is stunning. Absolutely stunning what many companies are doing now. They're not waiting for the laws to be changed. They're stepping forward now to make sure that companies are being more responsible. So in terms of social governance within companies, people are being held responsible for that now. And I think we see that also young people who are going into work these days, when you survey what they're looking for in companies, a huge percent of them only will go work for companies that have good social practices and take care of the environment, include D&I, diversity and inclusion. And so I personally, even though we see lots of bad things going on, the tide is definitely turning. We want all 123 people on the call today to be part of that. The Earth sirens are sounding. And so I really think the trend is positive. We overcame the ozone hole challenge years ago, which was smaller than what we have now. but it just shows that we can all work together and head in the right direction. So have a positive feeling and try and make changes individually.
We are at the top of the hour for your presentation, so I want to honor your energy and balance in life, and thank you for all the inspiration and expertise that you've shared with us. Thank you very much, Steve Smith.
My pleasure. Let's all remember we live on a little blue marble in the vast black ocean, and if we prepare ourselves carefully and joyfully to live a balanced life, we can help make this earth, recover a better place.
Thank you for that good news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.